In this video, we're going to cover number 5 in lesson 5.2 in your student journal. But first, we just need to review what the third angle theorem states. And so I have it highlighted right here in my text box. The third angles theorem states that if two angles of one triangle, so for example, angle B and angle A, are congruent to two angles of another triangle, angle E and angle D, then we know that the third angles in those two triangles also have to be congruent. Meaning if I know B is congruent to E and A is congruent to D in these two congruent triangles, then I know that angle C has to be congruent to angle F. Okay, so we technically don't need any information about angle C and angle F to know that they're congruent. All we need is to see that these two pairs of angles are congruent to each other. So we're going to be using this theorem in the next problem that we do. So we're going to do number 5 on page 132 in your student journal. So we need to show that the polygons are congruent, that the triangles in number 5 are congruent. So what we need to do first is to show that these triangles are congruent, we have to show that all of their corresponding angles are congruent and all of their corresponding sides are congruent. So that's what we're going to do. So let's find one angle pair that are congruent. So in the picture, I can see angle A and angle C are congruent. I'm going to go ahead and put that as one of my corresponding angle pairs. Angle A is congruent to angle C. And I'm just going to make a little note for myself that I know this because it was given to me in the picture. All right, let's see. I know that this angle here, angle ADB, is 90 degrees. Well, I can see that it makes a straight angle or a straight line with angle CDB, which tells me that if they make a straight line, they have to add up to 180. So if this is a 90-degree angle, so is this one. So I can see here that these two angles are corresponding. Now I can't just use D to name the angle because I've got more than one angle at point D. So I need to use 3 letters here. I'm going to say angle ADB is congruent to angle CDB. And I want C to come first because A came first. And I knew that because I saw that the two angles made a linear pair. So I'm just going to make a little note to myself that they made a linear pair. And I noticed that they then both had to be 90 degrees. Well, now we want to know, okay, well, what about these two angles? Are these congruent? And so think back to that third angles theorem. We know that there are one pair of congruent angles and another pair of congruent angles, which means then that these two angles must also be congruent. These two being congruent to each other forces that third angle pair to be congruent to each other as well. So let's add that to our proof. And again, I'm going to need to use 3 letters to name these angles because there are more than one angle coming off point B. So I'll name this angle ABD. Angle ABD is congruent to angle CBD. And the reason I found that by the third angles theorem. So now I have to go find the corresponding sides. Okay. So I'm looking for congruent sides in these triangles. I notice with tick marks that line segment AB is congruent to line segment CB. Make sure you're putting the order correct. We want to make sure our letters match up to the ones that they correspond with. And I knew that because it was given with tick marks. It was given in the picture. I have another pair of congruent sides. I see 2 tick marks here. So line segment AD is congruent to line segment CD. That was given in the picture. So now the third sides of these triangles, the third side is actually shared between the 2 triangles. This side, side DB, it's the third side of both of these 2 triangles. Well, if they share that side, doesn't that side have to be congruent to itself? So DB, line segment DB, is congruent to line segment DB. It's congruent to itself. Those triangles share that side. I'm going to put the reflexive property for my reason here. Remember, anything can be equal or congruent to itself. That's the reflexive property. So I've shown that all 3 corresponding angles are congruent and all 3 corresponding sides are congruent. And so therefore, we know that the 2 triangles have to be congruent to each other. So for my final answer, I'm going to state now that because of all these congruent parts, triangle ABD is congruent to, now the order matters. I put A first, so C has to come first in this triangle. B comes second, and D comes third.